Well, bright good morning to everyone. Delighted that you've joined us today for the Plants, Pests, and Pathogens October version. We got a great lineup of topics and speakers this morning. Just wanted to remind everyone to please keep your microphone turned off unless you are actually asking a question or sharing information. Please be sure that you sign in on the chat pod. Down at the bottom left-hand corner of your screen, you'll type your name, your county, and the number of people at your site. That helps us keep track of how many people are participating in the program. Don't forget that everything you type in the chat box is visible to all of the moderators. So please don't use the chat box to talk directly with another person about something not related to the meeting this morning. We are recording this session, so it will be available on the web, and agents, please be sure that you register so that you get credit on the learning management system. Just a quick overview of Collaborate. There's a toolbar up at the top that gives you some options of things that you can do. There's a preview window and a talk button right here that you can push if you want to ask a question or share information. There's a video button, and we encourage you not to use that button because we have a lot of people who are signing on from areas where they don't have a very fast connection, and the video takes up a lot of bandwidth. We have a main room that gives you a listing of all of the people who are participating today, and a whole list of tools that are right beside that that we may be using later. The chat box is in the bottom left corner. So type in questions if you want, or information, additional information, or links, or anything you want to share with the whole group into that chat area. The whiteboard area here is where the images will be placed from the presentations that folks are giving. So one of the first tools we're going to ask you to use is the pointer. So if you go over here to your tools bar and select, if you click on that, it will come up, and you may have a star or a pointer. You have options for a variety of different tools. Click on that, and then in this next slide, show us where you are. So we got people clicking in. Take a minute and just go ahead and let's see how much of the state is covered today with our meeting. While you guys are doing that, let me just introduce myself. My name is Lucy Bradley. I'm the Urban Horticulture Specialist at NC State, also the Director of the Master Gardener Program, and delighted to be your facilitator this morning for Plants, Pests, and Pathogens. And I notice we have the old logo on our maps. That I will get that changed before next time. All right, looks like we've got a heavy East Coast participation, or folks that are willing to click anyway. Thanks. So the Plants, Pests, and Pathogen is sponsored by the Plant Disease and Insect Clinic. They have many, many, many wonderful tools for all of us to use, with fact sheets and blogs and just all sorts of resources that are available from their clinic site. So I'd strongly encourage you to visit and take advantage of all these tools for yourself, and also for those people who contact you asking questions. I'm going to take a quick minute and welcome fall. In the Piedmont, it finally came last week. We had some cool days. We've been so dry this year, though, that the leaves are not anywhere near as beautiful as they have been in past years. I hope you guys out in the western region have a better show, or you may actually be close to done with your show by now. All of these tips that are included here on the fall page were taken directly from the Extension Gardener newsletter, from the fall newsletter. So there are lots more tips in the newsletter. If you want more information, you can just grab it straight from there. All right, I am delighted to be able to introduce Rob Trickel, who's our guest speaker today. He is the branch head for Forest Health in the North Carolina Forest Service, and he's going to be talking to us about issues for trees and forests in North Carolina. So Rob, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Like she said, I'm Rob Trickel. I'm head of the Forest Health branch, and just for your information, there's 5 people who work around the state in the Forest Health branch besides myself. In the western part of the state, that would be Brian Heath and Craig Lawing. They had 42 western states. In the eastern half, it's eastern 58 counties. It's Wayne Langston and Jim Sly, and then Kelly Oden. It does have one district, the one around the Raleigh area. She handles forest health concerns there. So these guys do talks for organizations. They train our county rangers in the types of pests that they may find in their area, and also go out and do diagnostics or help them with control on pretty complex issues that they find. So I didn't put their contact information in there, but at the end of this presentation, I have my contact info, and you're welcome to contact me, and I can get you in contact with them. Like I said, they do talks quite often to master gardeners and other groups, and are available statewide. So, so with that, I'm going to go on. I'm going to talk a little bit about some things that most of you probably know quite a bit about. I'm going to using kind of I made this a couple of years ago with the Star Wars theme, and kind of liked it. There's a couple of my puns and all that got dropped out along the way, but anyway, but I'm mainly going to talk about some insects and diseases that have been causing problems with us more recently, and primarily ones that are found in firewood or can be moved around in firewood. There's been some studies have been showing that, well, for instance, some of these insects can move 3 to maybe 10, 12 miles a year on their own, but we're moving 400 miles a day in firewood. So I'm going to concentrate on these. Some of, like I said, some of it's going to be review for some of you. Some of you, it may be a little bit of new material. First off, this map is on our web page, and we're keeping up with these invasive pests that do move in firewood. And interestingly, or sadly, in 2010, North Carolina was completely white, didn't have any of these pests. So all of these have appeared more recently in the past 7 years or so, and are moving around. And some we work with the plant disease and insect control, and some we work with the aphids as far as getting confirmation. All right, so the first one is gypsy moth. And for gypsy moth, this will be one that I think is the biggest success story. The gypsy moth has moved into the area in around 1990, and some things happened that kind of knocked it back a little bit, and it's been pretty much held at the border with Virginia since 1990. One thing I do need to get across, and some of our folks don't understand it, is that we do find gypsy moth in traps, plant industry traps. We've helped them trap in the past. Male moths are caught every year, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there is a population growing. It just means that male moths are in the area. They may have been blown in by a storm or found another way there. So we monitor a little bit more closely. We look for egg masses and other things to determine if there is actually a reproducing population. Let me go back, too far. So yeah, so this has been a success story of the Slow the Spread program. Every year, plant industry sends all the information to Virginia Tech, goes into an algorithm, and anywhere from 5 to maybe 20,000 acres are sprayed to knock back populations. But other than Currituck and part of Dare County, we've pretty much been able to hold that line. So I didn't want to go into that too much, but I did want to say that, you know, this is a success story that so far trying to keep a pest out that we you've been watching for a long while. Another one, and this one is something that's been new. I think we found it in 2011. It was found 2011, 2012, somewhere around there. And it was found in Haywood County. The thousand cankers disease, which is vectored by an insect, the walnut twig beetle. And I'll give you a little bit more information. Let me see. So what it does is this bark beetle, or this twig beetle, does carry a pathogen on it that, and it will attack walnut trees. That carries spores of the pathogen. The pathogen's rather weak. The lesions, I think, well, some people call them cankers, but they're more lesions, appear under the bark where these have, where the insects have bored in. And these lesions on their own are not enough to kill a tree. They generally get to about the size of a nickel to a quarter. The problem happens when these beetles mass attack a tree, and each one of these little lesions, well, a bunch of them will start coalescing and cuts off that tissue right below the bark. The tree starts to decline, and what we'll see, the main thing we're looking for is unhealthy trees, unhappy trees. It's a long, slow death. I've heard it can take anywhere from 10 to 20 years. For a tree to die. So when you find it in an area, it's been there for a while. This pathogen is native to the U.S., or the pathogen and the beetle are native to the U.S., and it's co-evolved with the Arizona cypress out in the western, or walnut in the western part of the country. It became a problem in California and Colorado, some places where people were growing walnuts for nut production, or where people who moved out west in the early days took walnuts with them. It was getting into walnuts and killing them out there. It's since been found in, okay, let me go back. I'll get to that in a minute. The impacts that it could cause, it could cause some big potential problems with timber and landscaping, especially in older neighborhoods, cemeteries, older houses, potentially high with wildlife. Wildfire, it's not going to affect wildfire very much, but food crops potentially high, and also culturally. When we were doing a survey out in the western part of the state, we went and talked to the eastern band of Cherokee Indians, and they do relate very closely to their walnuts. Like I said, it was first found in the western part of the state. We hoped it wouldn't come to the east. It did, and it's since been found in Tennessee, Virginia, Ohio, Indiana, Pennsylvania. There's several states have put up quarantines. North Carolina was one of the first. When Tennessee was infected, and so North Carolina put up a external quarantine, which means we wouldn't accept wood from those, or the movement of certain woods, walnut and all, from those areas that were already affected. And then later on, when it was found in Haywood County, and I'll talk about that in a minute, when it was found in Haywood County, there was an internal quarantine which regulated moving firewood or walnut wood out of that county. So, like I said, it is native to the U.S. in the Southwest. It did make it here. It was found in Haywood County in, I think it was 2012. And so far, it's only been found in 2 trees in the Great Smoky Mountain National Park. It took about a year and a half and finally found the twig beetle. Tennessee seemed to be a little bit more affected by this, and it seemed like it was the trees that were affected were older trees in urban areas, that old tree that was planted a long time ago behind the barn. And so University of Tennessee and Tennessee State University are doing a lot of research on this, and the jury's still out about whether this is a primary pest or a primary threat or a secondary. But it does cause a declining walnut. That almost looks like something I showed a little bit earlier, but it does cause declining walnuts. They start flagging. What we're looking for are these exit holes when we go out and do a survey, and the exit holes are about the size of the O in the on that penny there where it says United States of America. They're about the size of the O there, so they're very, very, very small. In fact, the insect is about the size of the I in America, and so they're very small also. And then we cut back some bark, and if you go too deep, and it's very easy to go deep. If you hit wood, you've gone way too far. But we can find the lesions just under the bark. So this is very difficult to find. We do trapping. Both plant industry does trapping under the Farm Bill, and we do trapping with money from the U.S. Forest Service. And so we're pulling traps now to trying to see if we can find where the beetle may have moved into new areas. And since 2012, other than those the two beetles that were found in a trap in the Great Smoky Mountain National Park, we haven't found it anywhere else. Not that we're not trying, we just haven't found it anywhere else. What we can do about it is the best thing right now is if it is a secondary pest, is to keep our trees, our walnuts, as healthy as possible. Perhaps those ones out west seemed to be a primary pest out there. Perhaps they were planted off-site, being that they're eastern species. And then the other thing we can do is prevent firewood. There's no real known controls. And like I said, once a tree starts declining and dying, it's been there for a while. So our options are limited or none. Another one that that we've been dealing with for a while, we dealt with the Plant Disease and Insect Clinic on, is laurel wilt. It is carried by a tiny ambrosia beetle, and the ambrosia beetles, of course, are fungus farmers. So they as they go in, they don't eat the wood itself, but they plant the spores, and they come back and eat the fungus as part. Both they eat it, and their offspring eat the fungus that grows in between. So, like I said, they deposit the spores. The fungus causes symptoms, causes the trees to exhibit wilt symptoms, and then later mortality. And we have found trees that have died in as little as 2 weeks to a month after they've been infected. My counterpart in Florida a few years back had taken some samples, some corings, and he took some corings about the size of a pencil eraser, and from some trees that had succumbed to laurel wilt, and he with trees that they had in a greenhouse, they drilled a hole in 100 small trees, and they inserted these little corings into the trees, and within a month, all 100 trees had died. So he was pretty excited. He's a pathologist, and he was pretty excited because it was doing what a pathogen should be doing. But on the other hand, he was not morbid about it. He knew that this was a terrible thing to have around. So the thing about this is that in its native country, it's thought that this beetle only attacks trees that are dead or dying. But here, it's attacking both stressed and healthy trees. And Yuri Hawker, who did some postdoc work over at NC State, has been trying to study and find out some of the reasons why they may be attacking healthy trees over here. And he's got a couple theories on that, which I won't go into right now. This laurel wilt does attack everything in the laurel family, the Lauraceae family, which includes red bay, swamp bay, pond spice, pondberry, spice bush, sassafras, and avocado. In some of our publications, we need to make sure we put out that it does not affect sweet bay and loblolly bay, because people see the bay in there and they believe that they're part of the Lauraceae family. Mountain laurels, rhododendrons, which were called laurels back in colonial days, are not part of the laurel family. So the ones listed up there in yellow above are the ones that are affected. The impacts with timber, the bays are, from a timber standpoint, from a forestry standpoint, are kind of wallflowers. They're there and nobody sees them until they're dying, or they create attention in some other way. Landscape, I put down low to moderate. It's not as much in North Carolina, but farther south, there's a lot of people who believe that there's a lot of people who were reporting that their live oak were dying. And so a large red bay or swamp bay will sometimes look like a young live oak. So, but they are planted in some areas farther south. There may be some planted as landscape trees in North Carolina. Wildlife value is very high. There's a lot of animals that depend on both the leaves and the fruit and the cover that the bays provide. The wildfire potential is really high because the tree, when it dies, does hold on to its leaves for at least a year. Holds on to its leaves. The leaves are dead on there, and it could cause a ladder fuel that causes wildfires to burn hotter and higher into the crown. Food crops, not much around here, but down in South Florida, parts of Texas, and Mexico. Well, Mexico does not want this. This would really impact the guacamole trade. And culturally, it is very important. The forest pathologist at the University of Florida was actually called in by one of the higher chiefs of the Seminole Indians and was basically told that the red bay and the swamp bay are very important to their tribe as culturally, part of their ceremonially, part of their ceremonies. They do use the leaves for cooking, for medicine, and for several other things. And the option of losing there was no option to fail trying to save the red bays from this. They wanted their red bays after this whole thing went through, and was helping the University of Florida with some of the monetary costs of doing some research to save as many bays as they could. So this is where it did come in originally to the United States at Savannah, and it's been moving in all directions since. You can see some jumps there where it's actually in Alabama, Louisiana, Arkansas, where there was big jumps, probably because of movement of firewood. And those areas, especially up there in Louisiana, Arkansas, and the upper parts of Alabama, or the middle part of Alabama, they're moving there in sassafras. Sassafras being the laurel family, it's going to carry it beyond the limit of the bay trees within the United States. So we've only found it in sassafras once, and I believe that was in Sampson County. And in Georgia, the more inland areas that you see there that are that pink and orange, those areas there, they've run out of the range of the bays, and they've started moving in sassafras in those areas. So climate matching wise, this can go a long way. The climate's not unlike where it came from from the Asian continent, and well, I'm not exactly, I think it's China and Japan, China or Japan. So, but it seems like in North Carolina, if you look there, we had two new counties in 2016. It has been going a little bit slower here than it had in the farther parts of farther south. Farther south, they had recorded naturally that the insect and the pathogen could move about 19-20 miles a year. And since it's gotten to North Carolina, it's slowed down. I don't know if that's a climate thing, or if it's our bay trees aren't as tasty. I'm not really sure why it's not moving, but it's not moving quite as fast. And even some of those areas in the purple where it was first found in 2011 in North Carolina, all the bays are not dead in that area, which is a little bit different than farther south. So we're keeping an eye on this. When we find it in a new county, we do take samples over to the Plant Disease and Insect Clinic for confirmation. And luckily, we haven't been taking too many over there lately, so there were no new counties found this year. We do for some of our pests when we survey and monitor, we keep these we keep track at a finer scale than they do at the federal level. Most states in the federal level they go on a county by county basis. We break it down for every report, put it in the GIS system, and keep it on a 10-minute grid, which is in North Carolina is basically a 10-mile grid. Just to show how it's moving, where it's moving, and where we're finding it. So you can see the movement there. It is kind of it is moving, but it's not moving very quickly. What to look for? First thing we look for is wilting foliage. We do a lot of our surveys in the spring because well, everything else is leafless except for turkey oak, and so between turkey oak and the bay trees, about the only thing that if it's brown, we're going to stop, take a look at it. It does cause the trees to wilt and die very quickly. They retain their leaves. We will see sometimes if it hasn't rained recently or there's not a lot of wind, these frass toothpicks being pushed out of the tree where they're excavating the wood. And then if you cut into the wood, you'll find the vascular streaking with the tree's reaction to the pathogen. And so far, I think most of the time when we've seen this streaking, laurel wilt was there, the pathogen was there. We have been surprised a couple times, so we still carry stuff over to the Plant Disease and Insect Clinic when we find it. What to do about it? There's not a whole lot we can do. There's an insect involved and a pathogen. So you would an insect may burrow into a tree looking for a tree that's not healthy, may burrow into a healthy tree, find that it's not suitable and drop a few spores, and the tree may the tree may then start to decline and be mass attacked later on. So even using an insecticide on the outside of the tree won't necessarily protect that tree. You would have to use both an insecticide and a fungicide, most likely propiconazole, to save a tree. And when you do that, and that was the propiconazole would be injected. You do that enough, and the tree better have a lot of value before you would do something like that. There are the University of Florida has found some trees that are that seem to have resistance, most of them to the pathogen itself, and they found a few trees that are resistant to the insects resist those trees. So. And we've been sending them samples of trees that we think may have, well, that have survived in an area where everything else is dead. So that's going to be probably the long term, getting back the laurels in the future. So the last one I'm going to talk about is the emerald ash borer. And this is one where I did have some extra slides in the beginning where I kind of compared some things in the past that when they came in, everybody compared those forest threats to the chestnut blight, and we're afraid that, hey, this could be the next one. This is one I've never said this was another pest that I've seen, but this is one that could have the same impacts. This is the like I said, the emerald ash borer, and I'll show you a little bit more about that. This one's scary to me. The adult will lay their eggs on the outside of the bark. The young will bore in, and they'll create galleries underneath the tree, which enough of them, after time, will girdle the tree, affecting the movement of food, nutrients, and all. Eventually leading the tree to decline and eventually mortality. It does attack all species of ash found in the U.S., including the 4 species we have in North Carolina. And if you, well, some of the botanists, some of the purist botanists will say we've got 7 species of ash. I'm more of a lumper. They all die the same. But the main ones we deal with are white, green, pumpkin, and Carolina ash. And then there's talk about Biltmore and another one in the Uaris, and if you go into the literature, there may be more than that. The ash being in the Oleaceae family, everything in the Oleaceae family has been tested. It does not attack privet, which would be a two-edged sword if it did. And it has been found to attack the fringe tree or the old man's beard. It doesn't seem to kill the whole tree, or if it does, it's a slower type thing. So, and this is the native fringe tree. The fringe trees that come from the Asian continent do not they're resistant to they're resistant to the insect itself. Oops. The impacts, it has the potential to attack and kill almost all untreated ash resources in the eastern United States. Over on the left, when we were doing aerial surveys, we flew up to the Roanoke River over near Carr Lake, and just to get a visual signature of what it looked like, and then we came back and we saw this all over the northern part of the state, but most of that was beaver damage. And so it looks very much like beaver damage from an aerial survey. But this was one of the biggest ones. This was found by an extension agent who was on a canoe trip down the Roanoke River back in 2008 or 2009. But we flew over it just to get a visual signature, and you can see along the river there, everything you see is gray, is a dead ash. In Toledo, the picture's on the right, 2006, they had the cathedral-looking street tree planting with all green ash. 3 years later, they all died. This picture could have been taken 50 years ago with the elms that line those same streets that's come to the Dutch elm disease. So if there's any message that comes out of that is in the urban forestry mantra is to plant diversity, as diverse as you can, no more than 10% of a species, no more than 20% of a genus, so that something like this comes through, we don't lose our entire urban forest. But when this goes into an area where there is ash, it's pretty it's pretty much final. The ash will succumb. Ohio State and Michigan State have done as much research on this as anybody, and they went in and they tried several silvicultural techniques to see if they could, different thinning regimes, shelter wood, and some other things, and they lost all the trees, both in their plots and their controls. So I think the first time they did it, first time they went and checked, they had lost 98% of the trees, and then they went back to test for survivors, and the 2% that had been alive the first time were dead the second time. So it is pretty complete when it goes through an area, any trees that are untreated. The impacts, ash make up about 2% of the trees in the state's forests of the state, and it seems to be in urban areas that number seems to hold true. Some cities have very little ash, some have a little bit more. Raleigh here does not plant ash along their streets, but they have a lot of greenways, and that's land that's bottomlands full of green ash. The ash industry, there's complications with quarantines. The whole state of North Carolina is quarantined for moving ash, and right now with the way things are going, it's pretty much moving it to South Georgia or Florida or out west would be a problem, because I'll show you in a minute, South Carolina is completely quarantined also. In some areas, especially in the Northeast, it's a very, green ash in particular is a very popular urban tree, and then you have the environmental risk. In the eastern part of the state, we're also trying to figure out what to do with some of those crep plantings where they are required to maintain, and some of them they did plant ash along the riparian zone, so we still don't have an answer at how to maintain them. So here's where it's been found so far. It was first found in Detroit area and moved quickly across Michigan and Ohio, Pennsylvania. The red dots on there are the first detection in a county. And in North Carolina, I'll show you in a minute, we're up to 33 counties. South Carolina, 4. And there are some indications that by the movement out to Kansas and Colorado, Oklahoma and Texas, that and even in North Carolina, there's a pattern that's showing that some of this movement is caused by man-made causes. So here's where it's been detected so far in North Carolina. I'm under no delusion that this is the only place where it's found. It's been found in 33 counties so far. I wouldn't be surprised if twice that number. It's found in twice that number, but it is a little bit cryptic. It's easiest to find when the tree is symptomatic, and by that time it's been there for 2 to 3 years, and it probably has another year, 2, 3 years left before it dies completely. So if anybody knows of any that are any ash trees that they suspect have emerald ash borer in them, if they'll let us know or let our county ranger know, if we can get a lat long, get a coordinate for where it is, we'll put that on the map. If it's the first time in a county, we will collect a life stage. Right now, they're in the larva. Some may actually be in the pre-pupa stage. We'll collect those and send them to APHIS for confirmation through plant industry. It was first found up in Granville County and Person and Vance, and the last time I was up in Granville County, all the ash in the northern half of that county, they're impacted pretty badly, and down in the Butner area, down there just down in that southwest corner, there's a lot of them there also. So it is on the move, and we are seeing some big impacts. So what we look for, the symptoms, we see declining ash trees. That looks an awful lot like that walnut I had earlier, and I think it is. So it's the first time I noticed that. Declining ash trees, though, dieback, flagging. You'll see epicormic sprouting along the bottom as the tree becomes girdled, and the signal for buds not to grow gets beaten back. So we will see that epicormic sprouting. We'll see the bark splitting. That's usually where an early infestation or an early attack happened. There's the damage underneath the bark from the galleries, and the tree tried to callus over that, and in doing so, the bark got pushed out and eventually split. We see those bark splits. You put your hands in, just curl your fingers under and pull off the bark in that area, and you'll see the galleries underneath that usually. The other thing we look for is woodpecker flecking. Or there's tanning is another word. There's a couple of words for the woodpecker activity, but woodpecker activity does increase in that area. Unfortunately, it doesn't happen soon enough. There may be also some there may be some enemies of some of the other metallic wood borers, the buprestids, that their populations build up, and maybe they can control in the long run, but they just don't. Their populations don't go up enough in the beginning to offer any control right now. So the signs we're looking for, when you peel back that bark, you'll see those little highways of meandering galleries, and sometimes you can't even see the wood because of all the galleries underneath. It looks like a superhighway. The larvae get up to about sometimes as much as 1.5 inches. They are, if you look at the segments on them, they are bell-shaped, and a lot of times you will find these underneath the bark. When they go into the pre-pupa stage, they may turn and go into the wood also. We look for D-shaped exit holes on the outside, indicating, and you can see a couple of them in that second picture under the D-shaped exit holes, indicating the shape of the insect as it's coming out. And they are brilliant metallic green in coloration, and if you lift the wings and look underneath, you'll see that there is a metallic purple underneath. So these are the signs we look for, the symptoms before that. What we can do about it is we do surveying. If nothing else, in urban areas, urban city forests, urban foresters and arborists should be figuring out what ash they have, doing some triage, figuring out which ones they want to save and which ones they can't save. Any trees that are dead, dying, in poor health, halfway in poor health, just go ahead and take them down. It's cheaper to do that now than to take down all the trees at the same time later on, and you spend a lot of times looking at the ones with poor health, wondering if it has it. So you might as well take those out. There are some things you can use for treating valuable trees. The cheaper stuff, imidacloprid, it works pretty well, but it has to, and it could be, and it's easy to apply because it can be. You can use a soil drench right around the base of the tree, but it has to be done every year or every other year if you don't mind the year being sublethal. You can do outreach to the public, monitor for arrival. You do have to treat early, and you have to treat often, like I said, with that. There are some pesticides. The Cadillac would be triage or imimabectin benzoate. That does have to be injected into the tree, and it has real good control and will last 3 to 5 years. I would say if you treat every 4 years with that, you can save trees. Here again, the tree's got to be valuable because it's not cheap for some of the injection products. That thing with the 15 miles is starting to become a moot point because we're starting to see enough emerald ash borer that I think that if you have a tree that's that you want to save, it's not too early to start throughout most of the state. In forest lands, there's not a whole lot we can do. It's too expensive to treat all the trees in the forest, and like I said earlier, you do have to retreat every year. There's silvicultural options are not an option. The University of Kentucky put something out a couple of years ago that says you should go in if you have a pure stand and thin it, not with the idea that you were going to make the trees healthier and be able to fend off an attack, but so you could get advanced regeneration of something else, so that when the ash is lost, something else would be ready to take its place rather than starting at ground zero. You can do salvage options. There are some biocontrols being tested, several parasitoids that APHIS has made available, and we've been releasing them in Granville, Wayne County. So it seems like there's 2 or 3 other places that we've been releasing the biocontrol from the. They have been tested, and we're putting those out to see if they can catch up. They're not going to control they don't control, though, in the early part of the infestation. Maybe they'll control if the wave goes through and misses a few trees. Prevention, there's some quarantines that I'll show you. I think I still have those coming up. And then we've been hitting hard, just not moving firewood as much as possible. Over on the right is based on a model with forest inventory data and soils and satellite imagery, where you would expect to find ash in the state, and that would be all species of ash. And okay, so yeah, the entire state of North Carolina is quarantined, as is South Carolina now. The northern half of Georgia, so wood coming out of here, going down to Florida, or to points west that still have color on the map. You can't move wood to that, but because North Carolina is in the quarantine area, you can move wood from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan down to Robinson County if you want. So it's pretty much, it's pretty much the cat is out of the bag with this one. So anyway, it's a brief overview of that. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but that's the best I can do with that. But my contact information is down on the, well, it kind of went off the side. It is rob.trickel@ncagr.gov. And the last 4 numbers of my telephone number are 4858. And if you do want one of the Forest Health folks to come out and do a talk for master gardeners or for a public forum that you have, they would be available for that. So anyway, if there's any questions, I can entertain those. I think Lucy said she would moderate those for me. So are there any questions?
Yes, I have a question. This is Gina Myers.
Okay.
We get questions from people in the county who suspect their trees have problems, and it's always a hard decision whether to bother our county rangers with the site visit, and I'm not sure that I would be able to give them enough detailed information. What would you suggest? I mean, how would you suggest that we handle the calls that we get about potential ash borers or ambrosia beetles?
I think we're getting some feedback there. It's okay to contact the county ranger if they feel overwhelmed, and if you have good communication with them and they feel overwhelmed. Ask them to let them know if you feel overwhelmed. The signs and symptoms that I showed, it is well, kind of on my side, I get calls to go out and look at them. And the interesting thing is when it was first found in North Carolina with the local media, there was a lot of information went out, and I got calls to go out, and I looked at 20 sites, and oh gosh, the first 2 weeks after it was found here. And what's interesting is of those 20 sites, 17 didn't even have ash on them. Most of them were sycamore. That were dying of, or that were being affected by sycamore anthracnose. But people saw that their trees were dying back, and that's what they remembered from the TV spots. And so I ran a lot of those, but it didn't matter because that's what we do. We assist people with their tree and forest health concerns. So, and the county rangers so far, I have called them a couple of weeks after either emerald ash borer or laurel wilt has been found in their county, and asked them if they're being overwhelmed. And so far, none of them have said they have. There's potential to. But the one thing that I have encouraged is for people is to get people to go to our site, look at the signs and symptoms that they're supposed to be looking for, and also to see what an ash tree looks like, and then send me a picture, or send the county ranger a picture, and then they can kind of do triage from the office of whether that's something worth going out and taking a look at, or if they can get the D-shaped exit holes, that vertical bark split, the woodpecker damage, and they can show that it is actually an ash tree. It makes it a whole lot easier to jump in the car and go out and take a look at those than every. I mean, I'm going to go to every call that I have to anyway. But so I hope I answered your question on that.
Rob, you also have a question about who controls the source of firewood that grocery store chains and others sell.
Okay, so if stuff is local, or if it's made within the state, there are no laws regulating the movement of firewood in the state. We ask people to voluntarily not move firewood, but the firewood that comes out of the Northeast, or comes even out of Virginia, still has to be. There's still some regulation because of gypsy moth about moving that wood. The agency that handles those quarantines and the firewood movement and the certification of kilns is Plant Industry Division. And there is a new person in the regulatory position there, Joy Goforth, who more recently worked in the Piedmont with Plant Industry as a plant specialist. She has taken Phil Wilson's place. Phil Wilson moved up to the director of Plant Industry. So Plant Industry is the regulatory agency as far as the movement and the sale and using the labels and everything that say that something's the certification labels for heat-treated firewood. Yeah, and the rest of it is kind of voluntary. The parks, state parks, kind of have a voluntary program, and they're telling people both on their website and when people call in to ask about camping at their place, and they don't want people bringing firewood that's either that's not bought locally or doesn't have the heat treated symbol on it, or certification on it. And Great Smoky Mountain National Park and the campsites on the Blue Ridge Parkway have rules now against bringing firewood on there that does not have the certification that it's heat treated. So you go to the Great Smoky Mountain National Park and you take your own firewood with you, they likely will tell you to, even if you have 2 weeks worth, they'll likely tell you burn it today because we don't want to come out and see it laying on the ground in your campsite. So, any other questions?
Well, Rob, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate all the wonderful information and resources that you shared and the great work that you guys in the Forest Service do. Really wonderful partner.
Give us a call anytime.
And yeah, and if you'd be interested or willing to share your slides, we have master gardeners that do speakers bureaus and agents that give talks, and so you'll just let me know later if there's anything I can pass on.
Oh, you're welcome to use anything like that. Thank you.
Okay. Well, next up is our dynamic duo. So I'm gonna turn the mic over to Mike and Matt. Welcome.
Thanks, Lucy. You can hear me all right? So Mike will be here in a little bit to talk about pathogens, recent pathogens, but I'm up first today and to talk to you about a few other things, a few insects and other types of arthropods. So I'd like to start off with a few photos. So we've been getting in a lot of photos of this year. I'm not sure if any of you out there have seen these, but today I'd like to talk to this thing this insect that basically when I saw some of these photos, especially something like this, didn't have a host name, I was able to actually guess the host because of the insect. And that's because these are informally hibiscus bugs. So this insect does not have a approved common name as hibiscus bug, and in fact it's almost always associated with just its species name, genus name, Niestria. So this is a hemipteran, a true bug, similar to squash bugs and stink bugs, but it's actually in the family Rhopalidae. And if you note down here, it says they do not have scent glands. These are called the scentless plant bugs. Box elder bugs are a member of this family. But this genus, Niestria, has 3 species in the U.S. They are native. And Niestria louisianica is the one species that's in North Carolina and is the most widespread species found from coast to coast except for the most northern states and Canada. So this is the one you're going to be finding in North Carolina. The 2 other species are more restricted. One's south in Georgia, Florida, Alabama. The other in Texas. And it's mostly a neotropical genus, so mostly found throughout Central and South America. Now, to note, I took this photo of a specimen in our collection. They do vary in color and patterns, but between individuals. But basically, note the striped hind legs. It has these patterns on what we call the conixium Connextivium. This is a part of true bugs. You'll see in assassin bugs and squash bugs and certain other bugs that basically the sides of the abdomen come out from the sides of the wings, and you have this nice patterning here. These bugs are about 7 or 8 millimeters long, almost a centimeter long when full grown. But again, you look for these, they're fairly host specific, so you don't really need to know much about their coloration off the host. These bugs, like I said, are fairly host specific, not specific to hibiscus per se, but they do include other Malvaceae, which is the mallow family, in their diet. This can include cotton, Chinese lantern, and I should stress this is a butylon, not the Chinese lantern physalis, which is a solanaceous host, and ochre, so mallow family again. They're not typically damaging to these plants, so people see them, see lots of them on the seed heads and the buds, the flower buds throughout the year. They may get a little agitated that they have these bugs on their plants, but they generally don't cause much harm at all, and we don't really recommend much control unless they are basically too numerous or too unpleasant to deal with. Then we might suggest cultural controls like just knocking them off into soapy water or using some approved chemicals for their control. But they're also kind of interesting, and they're not really going to hurt your plants. Now, one good thing about them is that they can be an important biocontrol agent of velvet bean, which is in the mallow family, of course, Abutylon theophrasti. This is an invasive weed in certain areas, and they've been known to feed on the seeds and reduce the vigor and spread of this weed. So again, one person's pest might be another person's beneficial. Now just a little bit about their life history. They're often found in large groups on the flowers and fruit. So like I showed the first couple photos, you got lots of, the first few photos actually will go back. You see a lot of young to older nymphs. There don't appear to be any adults. This one might have an adult right there. But basically, the females live for a little while. They can live for up to 2 months, and during that time they'll mate multiple times and lay multiple batches of eggs, and this is how you get these overlapping generations. So you can actually see this picture was taken on Centennial campus here in Raleigh, right near where we are right now. Basically you can see a mating pair of adults. The female is the larger one, the male is smaller. You can see a medium-sized nymph. You can see eggshells and very young nymphs all feeding on the same plant. So it's kind of interesting. You don't just get one generation and then these spikes. You get these overlapping generations. Now they feed, like all bugs, they feed on liquids. They feed on the liquids of the plant host. They'll feed from the seeds, like a lot of seed bugs, like milkweed bugs and things like that. That are kind of close relatives. Adults overwinter in debris around the plants. There's a very good paper about the life history of this insect. In fact, in Charlotte, North Carolina, it was based out of many years ago. And basically, all of the, so if you're in fall and you've got all these different bugs, many of the young bugs will probably not survive. But once they're adults, they're able to hibernate, just like many other bug species. Again, box elder bugs, they're close relatives, overwinter as adults. And these bugs overwinter in the leaf litter. They do have some mortality over the winter, but those that survive emerge in the spring. They start to feed on and lay eggs on the leaves because the flowers really aren't out yet on a lot of them, a lot of these Malvacean hosts. But once the flowers are out and especially the seed pods are out, that's when they really get going and they really enjoy feeding on seeds. You can actually see this one has stuck its stylet all the way in to gain access to those seeds. So again, they may be numerous, they're very brightly colored, and they may look really bad, but if you can stand them, they're really not going to hurt the plants much, especially if you have planted the plants, you're not relying on the seeds to spread new plants. So that's the hibiscus bug. Anybody have any questions about that before I move on? I know I'm sure some of you have seen them. Actually, maybe we can do a check if you've seen one. Has anybody seen these insects this year? They damaged the cotton boll. Okay, Mart. Apparently not. I mean, apparently they're not a huge pest in cotton, or else we'd hear a lot about them. I don't think that they're numerous enough to do damage. I'm not really sure. I've never actually heard of them being an issue in cotton. So I would imagine they're not really. I almost always see them on the photos, like I said, they're sent in on hibiscus because they tend to prefer hibiscus, I think, over the other hosts. So I'm seeing some yeses. So I have another question. They don't apparently carry or vector diseases that I know of. Again, I think because of how common they are, I would think that we would hear a lot about them vectoring diseases or having declines in hibiscus and such. Again, they were actually, there was a little statement on in one of the papers or online that apparently they released them in mass in agricultural fields to help control that velvet leaf or velvet the velvet leaf Albutulon theophrasti, the weed that gets in the agricultural systems. Okay, so moving on. Happy Halloween! Yay! It's almost there. It's almost time. But this is obviously not a pumpkin. You may be seeing a lot of these around. This is a marbled orb weaver that Mike Munster actually brought me yesterday. Very heavy female, very large, and at this time of year we're seeing a lot of large spiders. I was mentioning to him I've seen a lot of praying mantises this year. I think this has been a very good year for the large single generation predators. So basically these spiders, many of these orb weaving spiders, overwinter in an egg sac and emerge as spiderlings in the early part of the year. They're very small and are inconspicuous through most of the year until late summer, when they start to gain their largest size and start to mate, become gravid with eggs, and basically that's when people have been seeing them a lot lately. This spider, its abdomen was about the size of a penny. It's a fairly large spider, very, very heavy. Actually, it had a little silk line that I was holding it on, and it was pretty massive for a spider. This also brings up one of the hashtags that's been going on every year in October. There's a hashtag on Twitter called Arachtober to celebrate arachnids, and not just spiders. And so today, the second part, I'm going to be talking to you about another type of arachnid you might come in contact with, and that is pseudoscorpions. So pseudoscorpions are a very common group of arachnids throughout the world, throughout much of the world. And they're in the order Pseudoscorpiones. That is, so in arachnids you have things like spiders, which are in one order, scorpions, which are in another order, daddy long legs, which are in another order. So Pseudoscorpiones is the order for all pseudoscorpions. Now, it's a fairly diverse group, about 28 families and about 3,300 species. But the thing is, they're fairly inconspicuous because of their size. They average about 3 or so millimeters long, You know, some of the ones you can find around here may be a bit bigger, but the maximum size, the largest gargantuan one in the world, is only 12 millimeters long, and I can't even imagine seeing one of them. Most of the ones I encounter are very small. They would fit nicely on a pinky nail, and they really, they're kind of inconspicuous. Now, as many arachnids are, these are all predators. They feed on small, soft-bodied organisms that are living in the same habitats with them, basically searching out food. They have a lot of sensory organs. Their eyes are fairly small and range up to 2 pairs on each side. Now, they do share with true scorpions. They have chelae, or claws. So they're pedipalps, these structures right here that are the same types of claws in scorpions are found in pseudoscorpions. However, they don't have the end of their abdomen is blunt and does not have a stinger as in true scorpions. This is why we call them pseudoscorpions or false scorpions. However, that doesn't mean they're not venomous. In fact, pseudoscorpions do have venom glands in their claws rather than their tail. And they have a little pointy tip of each part of their claw. There may be 1 or 2 openings at the tip through one of the teeth, the very pointy teeth that where the venom comes out. So when they grab their prey, they envenomate their prey that way. However, they are not dangerous. There's no way these can be harmful to humans, and so you know they're harmless. Don't be afraid of them if you find them. Now, where would you find them? So they are found worldwide in temperate and tropical regions, typically in tropical regions. And they're often found under or on bark, in leaf litter, and even in homes. So I find them most often when I'm peeling bark to look for insects. I've also seen them like this one on this page. This was crawling on bark of an oak tree in my front yard. At my old house in Raleigh. But again, they're very small, so unless you're looking for them, they're pretty inconspicuous. Now, the ones in homes, there's especially a species called Califer cancroides, and this is known as the house pseudoscorpion, and it is known to live among humans in books and old papers, things like that have maybe book lice. Other types of larvae. They'll feed apparently on clothes moth larvae and other household larvae and other insects, even mites that are infesting mold or mildew. And so they can actually be important predators of pests that we have in our homes. They've even called them book scorpions because they live around books where book lice and other types of critters live. One of my favorite things when I was growing up was my mom had grabbed a damp washcloth from her bathroom to wipe my face and had one of these on there, and I was so excited. I'm sure she was not very excited, but I kept it, of course, in the worst way possible by just throwing it in a jar with some grass that I ripped up from the ground outside. Of course, I was too young to understand that they needed high humidity, things like that. And kept it for a little while, named it Skippy because it was a Skippy peanut butter jar. And unfortunately it died because I wasn't good at keeping them. But it was so interesting for me to be able to find this scorpion-like critter in my home. Now, some other interesting things about them is they spin silk from their mouth parts. They will spin silk used for mating, molting, so they'll spin a little carpet where they then molt and feel secure, and also to ride out harsh conditions like overwintering or other harsh conditions. They'll create kind of a cocoon out of the silk and live in it until they're ready to come out. Now, like scorpions and many other arachnids, they don't have direct fertilization. Basically, the male deposits spermatophore, which is a sperm packet on the ground. He'll often grab the female's claws, and they'll do a little dance where he kind of walks her over it until she takes it. And then basically once she's fertilized, she will, you can actually see this one I kept in the lab. You know, here, this is the same pseudoscorpion. Here you can see she's gravid with eggs. I couldn't really tell. But then one day I looked in, and there she is. She has a egg sac, egg case under her that she carries around. So they are pretty decent mothers. Like many arachnids, they carry their eggs with them or keep them safe in some way. Now, one last thing about pseudoscorpions is kind of interesting, is that many exhibit phoracy or are phoretic. This means they hitchhike or ride on other insects and other arthropods. And it's a way to travel to new locations. There's lots of mites, another type of arachnid that do this. But as you can see here, there's a very largish pseudoscorpion on this fly. It's basically grasped down on its leg or body part, and it takes a free ride to somewhere else. Now, I don't know about you all, but I don't know how this fly is really responding. The fly is not getting anything out of this. This pseudoscorpion looks to be at least 50% its size, which means it would be like carrying a young, tween or something like that on you, stuck to you while you move around everywhere. It's a very interesting thing. You'll see a lot of photos online of certain insects, especially I often see wasps and flies, probably because they're most mobile, that have pseudoscorpions attached. And in fact, harlequin beetles, which are very large longhorn that live in Central America, actually have encouraged pseudoscorpions to live on them, because the pseudoscorpions eat mites that live on the beetles that may be doing bad things or being a nuisance. And they've actually shown that these large longhorn beetles are kind of like islands of diversity for these pseudoscorpions, where they travel around and they have to find their mates then on these beetles and things like that. So pseudoscorpions are a very interesting group of arachnids. And they're really something. If you find one on some bark, it's really nice to look at them. But again, you'll probably need a hand lens or very good eyesight, because they're fairly small arachnids. Are there any questions about pseudoscorpions? All right. And let's see. So Lucy. I am forgetting how to do a multiple choice A through E, because we've got a little quiz time coming up. Let's see.
Well, I'm struggling with that too. Usually when you hit the down arrow, you can. Let me play with that for a minute. Hang on.
Let's see.
Here, I got it.
We got plenty of time.
3? 3?
5, I guess. A through E, if we could do that.
You got it.
There you go. Great. How did you do
Go
that?
up to Tools. At the top.
Okay.
And
okay, great. Okay, so now it's some fun interaction time. A couple of interesting photos I've gotten in recently, and so we're going to have a little quiz. So the first one, this was sent to me by Debbie Roos and photographed by Brittany Gerhold. What is it? Is this a fungus-infected caterpillar, a spider retreat, moth cocoon and egg mass, slime mold, or caterpillar with parasitoids? So answer with your answer with the button right above the participants list. So, okay, while people are answering, Stephen said, do they have any natural enemies? Yes, they are probably preyed upon by various spiders and maybe even other pseudoscorpions. other types of predatory organisms. They're not, I'm not sure how much the venom is used in defense, and they're fairly slow, and they don't seem particularly well defended by chemicals, or they're fairly soft-bodied. So I imagine they do get fed upon. But that's a really good question, because I've never actually seen any evidence of that kind of thing. But I'm sure it happens. Okay, we've got a nice spread of answers. Let's see. So I'll give you 10 more seconds. All right. So looks like now I'm trying to figure out where the summarize the poll is. Let's see. All right, so we have a lot of C's, but some B's and E's also. So either spider retreat, moth cocoon and egg mass, or caterpillar with parasitoids. Okay, so the answer is C, a moth cocoon and egg mass. This is an interesting thing. This is actually a very specific one, and if you see this, you're probably likely to know what type of moth it is, because this is the white-marked tussock moth. So Orgia leucostigma used to be in the family Lymantreidae, but that has now been sunk into the Erebidae. And basically, these are very common caterpillars. Many of you have probably seen them. They are very fuzzy. Apparently the hairs can irritate skin, but they don't sting. They're very crazy looking with these kind of eraser-like hair masses on the back. They've got these long, almost antenna-like setae. And these caterpillars roam and eat many different types of broadleaf plants while they're feeding. And then what happens is they go to pupate, and they make a cocoon out of their setae to protect them. Once they are done developing, they either turn into a male, which is fully winged and has, large antennae to go search out females, or the more unusual females that are completely wingless and actually emerge from the pupa and just sit on the pupa and call to males. The males will then come mate, and once she's mated, she will lay her frothy egg mass, as you can see here, just on top of her cocoon or very close by, because again, she has no wings. She really just is kind of a mating and egg-laying organism. And basically, those eggs will overwinter, and then in the spring they will hatch and become young tussock moths. So it's kind of an interesting thing. This one actually I had accidentally. I had it. This oak was there for food for another caterpillar in a bag, and then I saw the cocoon one day and said, "Oh, there must have been another caterpillar in here." And then I waited, and this moth popped out. I actually brought her home and was able to attract some males from putting her in the screen-in porch. The males were just coming onto the screens, and that's how I actually got this specimen too. So, so that's what it is. So if you see that, that's you know what it is. Okay, so let's clear this. Next one, and last one actually. So what is it? It's a plant seed pod, a caterpillar after parasitoids, old wasp gall, wood boring beetle holes, or drowned millipede. Okay, I'll give everybody another 10 seconds. All right, we had another spread, no C, so old wasp gall. Nobody thought that that's what it was. A few people for A, D, and E, and a lot of people for caterpillar after parasitoids. Well, you are correct. This is a caterpillar after some parasitoids attacked it. Now, the interesting thing is this used to be a very hairy caterpillar, but after it got bloated from the parasitoids and just pre-emergence, a lot of that hair just sheds off. The caterpillar's not alive anymore. And this is an interesting one. So this is a parasitoid in the family Braconidae. Eleodes is the genus. And actually, based on this one, with all these multiple holes coming up from it, there's only one species, Eleodes stigmator, that produces that kind of parasitism. So it's the only species in the genus in the eastern U.S. that will have numerous parasitic larvae in the same caterpillar. Now, other members of the genus, typically there's one larva in the caterpillar. They're called mummy wasps because the caterpillar, once it's at the end of its life from the parasitism, will kind of inflate and harden, and it mummifies. And then you can see this large single exit hole where the wasp came out. Now, in stigmata, though, of course, you've got all these multiple holes in the caterpillar. Now, these wasps typically attack the fuzzy, larger caterpillars, the noctuids, and some other closer relatives. So that was actually just the aftermath of a parasitoid infestation in a caterpillar. Okay. Lastly, most of the time, we do the bolo this time of year, and I talk about one specific thing a lot, and it started. So what's in the blinds? This isn't a quiz or anything. This is just a rhetorical question. So this is actually in my basement in the blinds, and you can see there's a couple things in there. Well, if we get a little closer, we can see what that is, at least the outline. And if we look a little closer, yes, this is brown marmorated stink bugs have started to come in. They apparently think I can't see them in there and have started to kind of tuck away, and they're basically getting ready to overwinter in confined spaces that they feel safe in, and they will spend all the winter months in that space. Now, I did take out these stink bugs and throw them outside again. They'll probably come back in, and I'll probably have to get rid of them again. But that's the way it is. So usually around this time of year, I say be on the lookout for overwintering insects. It's not only brown marmorated stink bugs, but also things like ladybugs, cluster flies, box elder bugs, leaf-footed bugs. You see a theme with the bugs because they often do overwinter as adults. And many flies, like I said, will overwinter as adults, and a few other groups, like I said, ladybugs and such. So they can become a nuisance. You can vacuum them up or pick them by hand. Once they get in the house, it's probably not good to just spray because there's so many areas that can be in, but also making sure your house, any holes are patched up on the outside, windows are sealed well. This will exclude these insects from coming into the home. Do they need a source of water when they overwinter? They do not. They basically are going to go in a resting stage, just like many hibernating animals, and will rest the entire winter. And then wake up in the spring, start emerging. So usually this time of year we start to see the influx. People see them much more commonly. And in the spring, when it starts to warm up, that's when we get the outflux, basically, the waking up and coming into the house again. Now, I've heard of a couple for brown marmorated stink bugs. I've heard there's a trap you can make with a light and some soapy water, where basically if it's dark out and you leave the light on, in a home, there's I think some websites to show you how to make this trap. It'll basically attract them, and they'll get knocked down into the soapy water, and it can help do that. Now, also, I got a message recently about kudzu bugs migrating to homes from soybean fields. They'll congregate on the sides of the house looking for an entry place, and they will overwinter as well. And so, you know, again, making sure that your house is well sealed. There are some ways, if you know that there's a certain outside wall, exterior wall of the house that gets infested by them until they try and move in, you can try and use some contact pesticides on that wall, but it has variable success. And so basically preventing them from coming in and making sure you capture them and dispose of them when they do come in is your best bet. A couple other things to look out for. Spiders on the prowl. So like I said, this time of year you're going to have the very large orb weavers getting ready to lay eggs and basically die after this big season that they've had. But actually a few times, this spider right here was collected by David Steffen, who used to do this job. He collected this for me a few years ago. I also saw the same type of spider while trick-or-treating with my kids a couple years before that. The male trapdoor spiders of some species are going to be out on the prowl. And these are fairly large, scary-looking spiders. They can defend themselves. They'll rear up and things like that. But they're also really interesting to look at. And this is one of the few times that you may see some of these trapdoor spiders outside of their burrows. In fact, the females rarely ever leave the burrows because the males travel at certain times of the year to go find the females to mate with. Another thing to be on the lookout is going to be, of course, the different fall and winter insects. Now, there are certain insects that do specifically enjoy and are adapted to cooler weather. You won't actually see them when it's warmer out. These include the fall cankerworms, which if you have a lot of them, and we haven't seen the huge infestations of the inchworms that come out in the spring in recent years, although they're present. These are going to emerge and come out around Thanksgiving, and now even the females are going to start crawling up trees, but also up the sides of buildings, sitting there mating with the winged males, laying eggs, which will then hatch in the spring and become the green inchworms that consume a lot of broadleaf trees. And there's a question, are there some products you recommend to get spiders from storage rooms? Can't seem to get rid of egg masses in dry storage areas in my house. That I don't know specifically. I'm not sure what types of compounds are specific against spiders. You'd have to talk to our structural pest expert on what are typically used by homeowners. I'm not really sure. They can also be, the problem is with spiders is when you get rid of them, other spiders will then come in and take their place. And spiders are very common around homes. So even if you remove all the spiders or kill all the spiders, you will get other spiders moving into those same spots. It's just kind of a very nice spot for them to be. So if you want more information, I can certainly help you out. Just send me an email, and I'll forward it to Mike Walvogel, who is our extension specialist on structural pests and things. Another fall insect that you might be seeing soon they almost look like little mosquitoes or gnats or crane flies. And these are the winter crane flies, the Trichoceridae. They basically, the larvae live in kind of decaying matter, leaf litter. They feed on all different types of decaying vegetable matter. And basically, this time of year is their time to start emerging, and they'll be present throughout the winter. Then when the spring comes, you won't be able to find adults. So they are fairly specific to winter. Now, to identify them from regular crane flies, note that they have very thin, they have antennae that kind of taper and are thin. They also have a very short vein right here, and will have little simple eyes. And they often do come to light, so you may see them. And other than that, there are a few other insects that may be present. There are certain moths that only come out in the winter. There may be some caterpillars. Dave Stephens told me about certain caterpillars that may be present but very slow in the winter, munching on leaves and things like that. But basically, winter is kind of a downtime for most insects, of course, but you will find some specific winter active species. And with that, I am done. But let's see, is Mike back? Looks like he might be.
Just got in.
Well, perfect timing. Thanks. And if anybody has any more questions, just let me know. Enjoy your winter. And we'll see you. I'll talk to you again next year.
All right. I guess that I will begin then. Today is my crazy day that happens every fall where I've got class until 11:30, which is a little bit short today, on the same day as plants, pests, and pathogens. So could be a little discombobulated. Let's see if though we can make this work. First of all, if you would give me a green check, those who can hear me. Oh, I see we're on an ABC. Let me change that to the yes, no, green check. All right. No red X's that nobody can hear me, so and a good 20 who can. Let's do it. First of all, being that Halloween is around the corner here, we want to start out with a mystery photo. So what were these? Were these strange objects seen floating over the city of Raleigh after the thunderstorm last night? Or what exactly is going on here? Think about that as we go through, and I will reveal at the end what this is or was. I want to do two things today. First, mention a few current diseases, you could call them. And the first of those is one we've talked about before on the program, but it seems that this year we've had maybe 3 samples come in, and I have seen it. I think there's a tree, I haven't looked carefully, but next to my daughter's bus stop that appears to have it as well, and there seems to be more than we have seen since like 2014, 2013 maybe, somewhere in there, and that is Passiflora needle blight. Excuse me.
Hey, Mike, you have one hand raised. I'm not sure if that was on purpose or not, but you might want to check in with. Oh, looks like it just came down. Sorry for interrupting.
On. Yes, thank you, Lucy. So Passiflora needle blight, and this is caused by fungus, which I'll mention the name of in a moment. But it is something that we would usually see on leylands. You may see it occasionally on junipers or on something like Monterey cypress, which I have an example of in a moment, but you will not see this disease on arborvitae. So if you have arborvitae, do not suspect Passiflora needle blight. So this is the kind of aspect that it has early on. This is Washington County pictures that came in this month, and then Chuck requested a physical sample, which came in and was now confirmed as being this disease. Notice that it tends to start in the lower portions of the tree and the inner portion, then work its way up and out. If you look a little bit more closely, you'll notice how it's individual needles that are affected, or sections of needles on the stem. And that's different from what you would see with Ceridium canker, where the needles would be more or less normal size and shape, but dead from a certain point outward. And you can see that here it's individual needles that are becoming affected. When the sample came in, it was interesting because most of it looked like what we would consider typical Passiflora symptoms, but there was one branch that had, as you can see here, the one branch that was dying back and looked different, and if you cut away the bark, you could see that there was, in fact, that transition zone between the living and the dead cambium and wood underneath. So that is currently in incubation to see if it's something like a Botrytis canker. But the main problem on the sample was the Passiflora as suspected. Here's a picture on Monterey cypress. Really demonstrating very nicely how you can have individual dead needles here, but then younger needles that came out after that are still looking good. If you had something like a ceridium canker, it would say girdle it here, and then everything from that point would die. Looking more closely, you can see the causal organism that is sporulating there on the needle. These tufts of basically an olive green, dark olive green, could darken them more with time. Spores that would be blowing on the wind and infecting new needles. Now, it's probably the water splash too. This is, and I was telling the students this just a few minutes ago, this is the only example that I know of in landscape ornamental pathology where we have a decision criteria based on scouting for the fungal organism that's causing the disease. And if you look in, I haven't checked to see if it's in the latest manual, but traditionally in the North Carolina Agricultural Chemicals Manual, there's a decision guide as to when to scout for this 2 different times a year that you would do that, and as the basis of your decision to use fungicides, that would be the criterion that we use. Now, the fungus name is Passiflora sequoiae, which I really like because it has every vowel in the sequoia part. And in fact, sequoia is a host. We have found it on that host here. It used to have several other names, Asperosporium, sequoia, Cercosporidium, sequoia, so you may have heard of this under some of its earlier names, now currently called Passiflora. Another sample that came in was this as a first image sample only from Mecklenburg County from a homeowner who first sent it as an email, and then we made it into an image sample on the database. And she thought she had scale insects on her little gem magnolia. She noted, though, that it was in the shady part of the tree and not on the parts that were getting more sun. If you saw the pictures, the rest of them, you would note that it was only on the upper surface of the leaf. Does anybody know what this is? And of course the hint is that it would not be scale insects, because Matt would have talked about it. Any takers on this? Either in the chat box or on the whiteboard? No, not powdery mildew. This is one that's it's not as common as powdery mildew, but it's not that uncommon either. Classic for it to be on magnolia or camellia. Classic for it to be in the shade. And not necessarily restricted to this time of year. You could see it pretty much any time of year on those kind of thick-leaved, evergreen angiosperms. Yes, Susan, that is right. Algal leaf spot. And here's not that same sample, but here's a close-up that Matt took of the algal leaf spot earlier, and he was kind enough to allow me to use this photograph. You can see how the algal colony there spreading out from a central point just barely underneath the cuticle of the plant, and that kind of very rough, irregular margin to it is a dead giveaway if you have a chance to look at it more closely. And there's some detail too about the kind of chlorophyll that's present in this particular alga that gives it that kind of reddish color, or orangish. Don't remember the details on that, but it is, of course, a curiosity in that most of our algae are not pathogenic. This is the only one that I know of that is pathogenic on plants. Another very interesting thing is that a fungus can come in and actually meet up with this alga and form a lichen. So it can become lichenized later on in its life cycle, turn more of a gray color. Here's a picture that Matt had of algal leaf spot on camellia, which is the probably second most common host that we see. A third sample that I wanted to show that came in as an image was this. It's obviously some kind of a basidiomycete wood decay fungus on a willow oak from Alamance County, but it was immature at the time when it was first photographed, and so we weren't quite sure what it was. Mark Kubeta had a couple of thoughts, and we just needed for a little time to pass. And before I show what this developed into later, does anybody want to take a stab at that? Susan, you want to try again? Go for 2. Again, it's a little tricky because it's not fully mature. Anybody else want to give a stab at it? No, not a jack-o'-lantern fungus. That would be a true mushroom, and it would form, of course this is immature, but that would form gills and it would be down at the base of the tree. Yes, Christine, lion's mane is one of the common names for this. Scientific name, Hericium erinaceus. I like the other common name, the hedgehog fungus. And what would have been in between these two pictures, and I didn't have time to put in some others from other samples or from the internet, but you can look it up. It's really a beautiful, it looks like a frozen waterfall, a ball of frozen waterfall when these white teeth first start forming on the fruiting body and before it turns kind of the tan color here. But those spines are where the spores are produced and are carried by the wind to other locations where they can infect wood and cause a column of decay in the tree, which is obviously what had been happening here. This is what we usually see it on oak. See it from time to time. This time of year is not uncommon. I remember about this time of year someone saying that she thought it looked like a wet cat in the tree. Seems to kind of prefer crotches, branch crotches to fruit and sporulate, so you may get that aspect too. So those are just 3 examples of things that we've gotten in recently as samples and that I wanted to pass along to keep on your radar. The Bacillora needle blight on leyland, some of the wood decay fungi like the hedgehog fungus here, and the algal leaf spot. Next, and for the last little bit, I want to focus on our spotlight group for this month. If you will recall, in March we talked about anthracnose diseases. In May, did a special on downy mildews, June on powdery mildews, and then last time in August on Phytophthora diseases. The last group here that I have chosen is one that I've been wanting to talk about for at least a year, but for one reason or another, just haven't done so, and finally we're going to do it. Not as common as these other problems here, but it's a very interesting group of fungi that relates well with the time of year that we're in. And I've titled this Xylariaceous fungi, carbonaceous is the new black. And I'll try and explain a little bit of what that means. But the overview of the group is fairly simple, although there are a lot of different variations on this theme. But we're talking about fungi that cause wood decay in trees, but it's not as rapid as with the basidiomite wood decay fungi, like the Hericium. Well, that can go a couple of inches, I think, a year. But some of those basidiomycete wood decay fungi are more quick at their work than these, which belong actually in the ascomycetes for those who are keeping score. They range from saprobes, meaning that they will just decay dead wood, to some that would be considered opportunistic pathogens. In other words, causing disease on trees that have already been stressed in some way. Some of these will even begin their life cycle in the tree as endophytes, so colonizing and invading the sapwood, maybe the inner bark, but without causing any kind of symptoms at first. And I'll mention that a little bit with this first one that I'll show. And then eventually it will produce spores, either first on and then within a stroma, or the plural would be stromata, which is a dark, eventually dark, hard fungal structure of various sizes and shapes. And this is the macroscopic aspect of it, so we probably wouldn't even notice some of these things if they didn't produce their spores in and on these stromata. Let's see here. One second. Oh, the carbonaceous thing. Yes, that's where the word carbonaceous comes from, meaning coal-like. because a lot of these things, they have brittle and very hard black tissue in the fungal stroma. And I should say that even though the colors are fairly dull here, the stories about some of these things are quite colorful. Another thing characteristic of this group is that the fungal names are very difficult to spell and even pronounce. But we'll give it a try. I do want to mention one other thing in general about these, though, is that they very often, associated with the decay, will have zone lines in the wood, so dark lines running through the wood. And here's a picture taken from a wooden pencil holder that the late Dr. Larry Grand had made with wood that had these zone lines in it. So you can see there that was laid down by the fungus that was invading and decaying the wood. But it's quite attractive, actually, once it's been cut and shellacked. So the first example in this group, and is the one that you are most likely to encounter, is Biscanotia atropunctata, which used to be called, what was that called, a hypoxylon. You may have heard it under that name. This is one that does start out as an endophyte, so it would infect through a crack or a wound and then colonize the sapwood, doing no harm while the tree is doing well. So it's held in check by the tree's defenses and also by the high moisture content in the sapwood. But then, when the tree is stressed, and this would typically be by a drought, that moisture potential changes in the sapwood and the fungus can take off. And then, of course, the tree's defenses would be down as well. And you would say, well, what's really damaging the tree? Is it the drought or is it the fungus? Well, think of it like the tree is starting to go downhill and the fungus is kind of pushing it downhill. So in this example, which came from a couple of years ago now, but about this time of year, November, in Mecklenburg County, so the crown of that small tree looking pretty poor, but then you'll see where the bark has come off, and this is not just the innocent shedding of bark like we saw with Smooth Patch in last month or 2 months ago where we did plant specimen pathogen, but this is actually in the wood, and when the bark falls off, it reveals a large stroma of the causal fungus, the Biscanotia atropunctata. It starts out as a tan color and then matures to the silvery color. You may see kind of more of a grayish. There's also another species that does occur. Just put this one as the common one that you can use as a reference. This was, by the way, a sample that was diagnosed from the images by Chuck Hodges. It is something that we most often see on oaks, and so the one that you're most likely to encounter, and it can be quite long in its up and down extent on the trunk of the tree. All right, our next member of this particular group is Cresmeria dusta. It used to be known as Eustulina dusta, which is not any easier to spell, really, but the Cresmeria, just talking about letters and words here, I think is impressive because of the string of 6 consonants in a row. If you're spelling it without 6 consonants in a row, you are misspelling this word. But the important thing is that it's one of the wood decay fungi that can cause some real problems. This picture was from July of this year from Pitt County. We did get a physical specimen to back this up. We've seen it, well, actually 2 samples this year in July, both of them. And one of them was on pecan, which is unusual. But this particular one, the submitter stated that it was from either an old stump or exposed root, and that it was between a hickory tree and a very old, mature oak tree. In this case, the wood of that buried root or whatever would have been infected years ago, likely at a wound, although there is some evidence that this thing can spread from tree to tree. But this is the manifestation here as the fungus is now sporulating on the surface of the soil and forming this mass of stromata. The physical sample as it came in, it was nicely cut up by the submitter, and we can see both the covering of stromata here, the decay of the wood here, and even some of these zone lines that we were talking about in the wood itself. Now, the problem with this thing is that it's notorious. Even professionals, for them it can be hard to detect the decay caused by this particular fungus. And there was a tragic case in 2015, a large maple tree that fell down in Raleigh, and there was somebody, an arborist or somebody working in that tree who was killed, actually, and Chuck later got a sample from that situation and diagnosed it with this particular fungus. If we look closely at the surface of it, you see the little lumps of the stromata, and then also where the white arrows are, you can see some of the parathecia, the fruiting bodies, the tops of them anyway, popping out through the surface, and that's where the spores would be released. Then again, they would be wind dispersed to new locations. Apparently this is quite a problem in Europe on various hardwoods. This is a picture of a tree that fell down that was posted on Bugwood from this particular fungus. Our next example in this group, which may be familiar to some of you, is Xylaria polymorpha. There's another species called Xylaria malide that occurs. And this particular one has a rather imaginative common name. Does anybody know what that is? Nope. No takers on that one. Okay, you may have heard this called dead man's fingers, the way these black stromata are emerging through the soil. Sarah says witch's fingers. I had not heard of that term, but I wouldn't be surprised if somebody called it that, poking up through the ground like they do. This one can be a saprobe, just decaying dead hardwood, but it is a known pathogen, especially on apple trees, along with, of course, Xylaria malide, you can guess from the name there. And on apple, this fungus causes a disease called black root rot, not to be confused with black root rot from Phalaenopsis vesica that we see on things like pansies and Japanese hollies, excuse me. On the apple, it would cause growth reduction, could cause smaller fruits to be produced, even in abundance, premature fall color, etc. Your typical stress symptoms from a root rot disease. This next picture is a wonderful one. This one came off of Bugwood as well as did this one, seeing the connection between the decaying wood and the root and the fungal stromata. Moving along to our next example. This is one from summer of last year that Dave Steffen, our retired entomologist from the clinic, had brought to my attention. He found these things sticking out of a dead carpinus in his backyard, and it almost looks like it's trying to produce figs or something. You might mistake this for some kind of an insect even, but it turns out that this is a fungus called Daldinia, and I wasn't quite sure. I didn't get the right stage to be sure, but I think it's Daldinia clavata is the species. It's either that or the one that I'll illustrate next, and the club shapes to these fruiting bodies are probably what convinces me that it's that particular one, Daldinia clavata. And you can see where it was cut away, the concentric rings that are visible inside the fruiting body there. And in this case, the Daldinias are going to be strictly saprobes, so decaying dead wood and not causing disease themselves. The other example of it, quite a famous one actually, is Daldinia concentrica. And that is something that goes by a couple of common names: carbon balls, cramp balls, and even one called King Alfred's cakes. The story is quite interesting on this one. There was a king of the, what was it? One of the Anglo-Saxon tribes in England. I forget which particular group, but King Alfred the Great, Wessex, I have it written down here. And that was back in the 9th century. But then in the 12th century, this legend arose that when he was fleeing during some of the wars with the invading Vikings, he incognito took refuge in the countryside where he was asked to look after some cakes in the oven, but either from distraction, the worries of his kingdom, or sleep, or whatever, he let those cakes burn, and that these fungi, these fungal stromata, are sort of reminiscent of the cakes that King Alfred let burn. So that is what explains that particular common name. As I say, some of these things have rather colorful stories associated with them, even though they don't have color themselves, except for this one. And this is one of my very favorite fungi, and I'm finally getting to talk about now. It's called Camellia tinctor. And it's not that the fungus itself has the coloration. It's pretty ordinary looking, just kind of a lump there, a flat stromata on the branch. And the thing that makes it really interesting is the way that it discolors the wood to that orange and later brown underneath the stromata. This one is basically also a saprobe, so on dead wood, although it's thought to be pathogenic on sycamore and plane tree. I believe it causes a canker there, or it can. So that wraps up our quick tour of the xylariaceous fungi. With the exception that I will reveal now the mystery photograph, as someone who said sweet gum balls was correct, but what the stringy things are coming out of them is one of these, and this is probably not the correct current name, but one of these xylariaceous fungi, Xylaria persicaria, that will grow on those things. And you've maybe have seen it also in, or a related fungus coming out of fallen magnolia cones. With that, a very quick look at the be on the lookout for list for the winter months. There's not much, of course, in the vegetable garden right now. So on the crucifers, if you have them, sclerotinia stem rot can be a problem this time of year, as well as black rot. So be sure to inspect your transplants carefully that they do not come with black rot. And in the case of turnip, a disease called white spot to be on the lookout for. Woody ornamentals, of course, entomosporium leaf spot will be out there on the red tip photinias, if there are any red tip photinias left, and on susceptible varieties of Indian hawthorn. Cercospora leaf spot on ligustrum, other trees losing their leaves, and we'll start to see that. Phytophthora root rot, even though the infection took place a long time ago, when the plant becomes stressed is when we start seeing the symptoms. Likewise with armillaria root rot. We're past the season now, probably when we would see the mushrooms, maybe down toward the eastern part of the state, but that in this area at least, those mushrooms have come and gone. Rhizosphaera needlecast on spruce up in the mountains, and boxwood blight. It's been kind of quiet on the boxwood blight front lately. I hope that's a good sign. Although of course the long-term news is anything but bright in the whole boxwood blight situation. And as trees start losing their leaves, we will start to notice the septobasidium, the felt fungus on some of these, especially smooth bark trees, which is associated with scale insects. The fungus is not infecting the plant, and we've talked about that earlier on this program. In our flower beds, a lot of emphasis right now on pansy and viola. We're starting to see problems. Had some plants come in from commercial beds. One last week that turned out that it had Phytophthora, which appears to have come in from the supplier of the plants. But one of the things you want to always do is inspect the roots on your pansies and violas to make sure they do not have black root rot. And we may start to see some botrytis blight over the winter hitting the blossoms and eventually the leaves. So a otherwise quiet winter ahead of us. Watch out for deer, watch out for reindeer, and what does BOLO mean? Oh, that is our term that we borrowed from government use. It stands for be on the lookout. So those things that you want to keep in mind for the coming months. And for the first time in the history of plants, pests, and pathogens, we're finishing right on time.
Except we have announcements to go. But congratulations to Mike and Matt for finishing before the noon hour. And thank you guys for another great year with Plants, Pests, and Pathogens. This, of course, is our last program for 2017. We'll be sending you a survey to get your input as we make plans for next year's program. I have a couple of announcements to run through real quickly before we close out. Before I do that, are there any questions for Mike?
All right, you're very welcome. We'll see you next year.
Okay, just wanted to make sure that you guys knew that in partnership with Longwood Gardens, NC State Department of Horticulture Science is now offering non-credit horticulture classes that you can take online. We currently have 3 available. One that's annuals, perennials, vines, and ground covers, one that's trees, shrubs, and conifers, and the third one is edibles, bulbs, and houseplants. So you can go to the website listed there for more information and to register. They happen sequentially. So we're just finishing up the trees and shrubs. The next one will be edibles, bulbs, and houseplants coming in the spring. A quick but huge thank you to the Brunswick County Master Gardener Volunteer Association for donating $500 to the Master Gardener Endowment recently. Wanted to be sure that you guys knew that you can find information about plants, pests, and pathogens on ncsugarden.com. You can go to Training Advanced and then Plants, Pests, and Pathogens, and you have information about upcoming groups, plus there's also downloadable information from previous workshops. You can also go to this shortcut, go.ncsu.edu/PPP for plants, pests, and pathogens, and that will have information about the speakers and links to historical information about the program. This site is available to the public, so it does not have the link to the current program. If you need a link, then either come to ncsugarden.com to find it on the advanced training page or on the calendar page. You can get it either of those places. It's also sent out via email, so join the listserv to have the link sent straight to you. We continue to make good progress on the Extension Gardener Handbook, and hopefully we'll be done with editing by the end of this month and ready to turn it over to the publisher. So hard copies coming soon. The handbook is already up online and available, so enjoy. Wanted you to know that the Master Gardener guidelines and policies are all available online at this address, go.ncsu.edu, EMGV-guidelines, and it's got links to all of the information that you might want about the program. Second edition of Collard Greens and Common Ground is out. This is the Community Gardening Handbook for North Carolina. It's available through UNC Press, but it's also available for free online and also as a downloadable PDF. We have our new logo, yay! Very exciting to be tied directly with NC State and making clear our relationship there. We have a set of guidelines available to answer questions and to give you demonstrations of the ways to use not only the logo but our service mark. So this top one is the guidelines and directions on how to use it appropriately. The second one is a link to downloadable logos. So it's got the state logo and the county logos and association logos, as well as things like letterhead and business cards and PowerPoint templates, and those sorts of things are available at the second site. This is the address to go to if you want to join the Extension Master Gardener listserv. So this is email that comes out directly to your email account. So I invite you to join that and get the latest news. Also very excited to be launching Master Gardener Logo Wear. We have a current website that allows you to order a few items. Our partner is in the process of updating the website and expanding the offerings, and that should be available soon, but the web address will still be the same. Go.ncsu.edu, EMG Logo Wear. We still have 3 seats left on the Costa Rica trip. The trip is made. Everybody that signed up is going to have a magnificent time. Kathleen Moore and Sean Banks will be co-leading the trip, and there are 3 seats left. If anybody's interested, here's the website address that you can go to register to join the group. It's going to be an awesome trip. They're going to be doing yeah, even for those of us who've been before, there are new things added on this trip. We'll be going to the Nilla Vanilla Herb Emporium and Garden and all sorts of incredible things. So go to the website to learn more about that. And I wanted to make sure that you all knew that we have added to the plants database at plants.ces.ncsu.edu. We have added all of the recommended varieties of fruits from Dr. Parker. So Xiaowei Li is a graduate student who graduated this last semester, and one of his projects was to add, not only apples, but all of the varieties of apples that Dr. Parker recommends. Same, with all the, plums, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All those recommended ones are up here along with the varieties, and it's got detailed images of, flowers, fruits, the actual fruit, and information about the trees. So lots of great information available now just for you. Want to let you know that we have started the interview process for the state program coordinator, and we should finish that up next week. So hope to be making an offer soon, and surely we'll have somebody on by January, maybe even before. So any questions from anybody before we close out today?
Lucy, you had a question up in the chat box that got pushed away by the people leaving the room.
So the question from Rich is, we used to be associated with both NCSU and NCA&T. Are we no longer NCA&T? We have always been an NC State program. The Master Gardener program has been housed out of NC State. We have the good fortune to have some agents who work with NCA&T and have NCA&T funding who work with our program. So we are primarily an NC State program, and that's why we have the logo that we do. Were there any others up there that I missed while I was yakking? Okay. Okay. Well, be on the lookout for a survey that will be coming your way about plants, pests, and pathogens, and looking forward to hearing your good ideas about what you'd like to see next year. Thanks for joining us today. We have recorded this session, and it will be available later. Bye.